Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and to the fourth episode of Research Paper Summary. Today I'll be covering the paper Temporally-Informed Analysis of Name Entity Recognition. This is an ACL 2020 long paper that I find quite interesting. It focuses on analyzing the effects of temporal drifts on NER performance, as well as it shows us how we can use temporal information of documents to improve the overall NER performance. Now this video will be split into 5 main sections. I will first briefly cover the dataset and model used in this research. I will then dive into the 2 key research questions that allow us to see the effects of temporal drifts on NER performance. Thirdly, we will explore why/how exactly does temporal drifts affect the performance of NER models. Fourthly, I will cover some of the modeling techniques introduced in this paper to model temporal information for NER. And lastly, I will finish up this video by sharing some of the key results of these modeling techniques. I hope you find this video interesting and useful. Let's get to it. If you're new here, my name is Ryan. I'm a first-year PhD student based in London, and on this channel we share actionable insights on different topics in AI research, entrepreneurship and life design, encouraging us to take more actions and live a happier and more intentional life. If these topics sound interesting to you, consider subscribing. Many NLP models are trained and evaluated on data that are available during model building time. But most often, these trained models are used to make predictions on future data where data distribution might be different. This temporal drift usually leads to lower performance during predictions. For this research work, the paper has 2 main hypotheses. Firstly, models trained on data from a closer time to the test set obtain better results, assuming everything else equal. Secondly, models trained on combined data from different time periods perform better than models trained just on subset of data, simply because more data usually means higher performance. Let's now dive into the dataset and baseline model. In terms of the dataset, the paper has created a new Twitter NER dataset that consists of 12,000 tweets evenly distributed across 6 years from 2014 to 2019. Twitter is a good source of data for this experiment because A, it already has timestamp information for each tweet, and B, people tend to post about current events on social media, and so the dataset are likely to capture changing entities over time. There are 3 types of entities in this dataset: organization, person, and location. The paper focused specifically on 2 contrasting sets of Twitter handles. The first one being individuals from different domains, and the second one being mainstream news organization and local news outlets. The research uses the temporal split of 2014 to 2018 as training data and uses 2019 tweets as test set to evaluate the performance. In terms of the baseline model architecture, the paper uses the popular stacked by LSTM CRF model. The paper experimented with globe and flare embeddings, essentially the difference between fixed and contextualized word embeddings. The paper wants to assess whether the type of embeddings have any effects on NER performance. All the embeddings were trained on dataset outside the time range of the Twitter dataset. Lastly, they also used character embeddings to capture sub-word information. To assess whether temporal drift affects NER performance, we need to look at 2 key research questions. Firstly, what is the effect of temporal distance between the training and test dataset on NER performance? Here, the paper trained the baseline model on each year from 2014 to 2018 and test each model on the 2019 test set. The hypothesis is that the further the year is from 2019, the lower the performance is. And as you can see here, the hypothesis is indeed true. And also, contextualized flare embeddings seem to yield better results than fixed globe embeddings. Secondly, how does the size and temporal distribution of our training data affect NER performance? In order to answer this question, we have to A, test different training data size, and B, test different temporal distribution of training data. In terms of training data size, we start at 2,000 tweets and increment by 2,000 tweets at each step, all the way up to 10,000 tweets. In terms of temporal distribution of training data, here we have 2 different sampling techniques: random and temporal. Random sampling techniques where we mix up all the tweets from different years and draw up our 2,000 tweets to train our models from that mix. Essentially, the random sampling technique is where we train our model using tweets from different years. Temporal sampling techniques, on the other hand, is where we train our first model using just the 2014 tweets, the second model using the 2014 and 2015 tweets, and we keep repeating this until we are training the model with all our training data sets in the final iteration. The results here shows that with random sampling, the model was able to yield a steady performance increase as we add more tweets, regardless of the type of embeddings. The temporal model with only 2014 data at 2,000 tweets has a lower performance than the random sampling strategy. This shows that the data distribution changes over time, and training randomly with all the years is more informative and leads to better NER model. Also, as we add tweets that are temporarily closer to our target test set into the training data, the temporal strategy performance slowly converges to the random strategy performance, again showcasing the effect of temporal information. So we know that the temporal distribution affects the NER performance, but how exactly do they affect it? Let's now look at the following 5 aspects to answer this question. First, type distribution. Here you can see that there's a similar distribution of entity types across the different years, meaning that this is unlikely to be the reasons why there's a performance difference across time. Secondly, we have mention overlap. The figure here showcases the unique overlap of mentions with respect to our 2019 test set. As you can see here, as we get close to 2019, there's an increased percentage overlap of entity mentions, and this is an important factor for the F1 score improvement. Third, we have type-wise mention overlap. The figure here showcases the surface form overlap of entity mentions over different types from 2014 to 2018. As you can see here, there's a clear temporal drift at the mention level. For all three types of entities, as the temporal distance decreases, there's an increase in percentage overlap of entity mentions. Notice here that the person entity type has the lowest overlap mentions. This makes sense as people discussed on social media tend to change frequently. The fourth aspect is the type-wise model performance. Here's the table of NER performance split by entity type, embeddings, and years. We want to see which entity type is affected the most by the data drift. As you can see here, flare embeddings outperform glove embeddings in all entity types. Overall, the person entity type has the best performance for both models, with F1 scores around 20 points higher than the other two types. We saw from the last figure that person type has the lowest overall overlap between training and tests, and so we thought person type might perform the worst, but clearly the result shows that the model has the ability to learn context that person entities appeared in. In terms of the temporal differences by year, with glove embeddings, the smallest performance gap between 2014 and 2018 is person entity type. Organization entity type suffers the most from data drift in terms of performance. Similar results can be found with flare embeddings, although the magnitude is less. These numbers make sense given that organization has the largest increase in overlap between mentions in training and test data from 2014 to 2018. The fifth aspect here looked at the mention unseen in training data. The table here showcases the recall for these unseen mentions using both glove and flare embeddings. Glove performance steadily improves as temporal distance decreases, and similar pattern can be seen with the flare embeddings. This shows us that the surface form overlap is not the only factor that determines the temporal data drift. The model is able to learn more relevant context from training data that are temporally close to the test set. Now that we know about temporal drift in training data, we need to allow our NER model to capture this temporal information. We can capture this temporal information in two ways. First, we can alter the architecture of the baseline model. And secondly, we can modify the construction of training data. The paper has kickstarted the initial exploration of using temporal information in NER models, and here are some of the methods that they have explored. Firstly, we have sequential temporal training. Order the training data such that the data that's temporally closest to the test data distribution is used to train the model last. This was inspired by the findings that more data is beneficial, but individually, the closer the data, the more useful they are. The second method is temporal fine-tuning. Here we train the baseline model on whole dataset from 2014 to 2018 and fine-tune the trained model on the closest temporally year to the target, which is 2018. This is based on the findings that training the model with data that's the closest to the target data gets you the best performance. Thirdly, we have instance weighting. Assign higher weights to tweets that are temporarily closer to the test data. Previous work in domain adaptation has shown that giving higher weights to training instances that are similar to the target domain can lead to performance improvement. And lastly, we have year prediction as an auxiliary task. Enhance the model with multitask learning component that performs year prediction as auxiliary task. The auxiliary task is to predict the year that the tweet was created in. The idea behind this is that the parameters learned will retain the temporal information that could help with NER prediction. Let's now look at the results of these different methods. The baseline model here is trained without any temporal information. Overall, the result shows that our model can achieve a better performance over the baseline model by using simple techniques that incorporate temporal information. This might mean that semantic drift can partially be captured using contextualized embeddings. For glove embeddings, the temporal fine-tuning method yields the highest results, whereas for flare embeddings, the instance weighting yields the best results. And that's it for today's video. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe as I'll be covering more research papers in future videos. In the meantime, feel free to check out other episodes of the series on my channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys around next time.